All right, guys, in this video, I kind of wanted to go and just break down all the skills in just one video and just really focus on each of the skills. So Scarlet Witch has 3 different classes, and the first class being HEX Energy, the second class being Chaos, and the third being Witchcraft. Now, in my last video, I did not go through each of the skills, and a lot of you were asking me to make sure to kind of show each of these skills and explain each of these. So you know what? That's what exactly I'm going to do. So starting off here with the Hex class, we start off with the Hex Bolt. Now, the Hex Bolt gathers and launches a ball of Hex energy forward to deal 245% damage to enemies in a straight line. Now, as you guys can see, I did not go with this one. I went with the Hex Lightning, because the Hex Lightning focuses and launches a ball of Hex energy on the single target to deal 741. Even though I'm currently not equipping this, if I was building for Hex, the Hex Lightning would be the one I would choose out of these two. Now, the third one we have here is the Hex Wave. This right here gathers the Hex energy to create a barrier and launches the energy forward to deal 708% damage. This looks really good because it creates a barrier equal to 27.36% of max HP for 10 seconds, and then it has a medium guard break. The thing that I don't like about this is, first of all, the cooldown is way too long. It's 30.6 seconds, and then it also requires a lot of stamina. I do feel like maybe I still would probably go ahead and test this, but as of now, I just don't see it worth adding this and being better than the Hex Lightning I have on the left here, because the Hex Lightning does more damage, it has a shorter cooldown, it requires less stamina, and it has the same guard break. If the cooldown was a little bit lower, I would see this as potentially taking over for the Hex Lightning. But as of now, the Hex Lightning is still the best one for this first category. Now, is this last one right here, the Hex Force Field, going to top the Hex Lightning? Now, the Hex Force Field gathers the Hex energy to create a barrier and pulls in the enemies nearby and detonates to deal 344% damage and knocks them down. This also creates a barrier equal to 27% of max HP for 10 seconds, knocks down when the skill lands. So if the skill lands, they get knocked down, and then you have this barrier that is equal to 27.36% of max HP. This one is lower in cooldown, lower in required stamina compared to the other one. I'm not comparing it to Hex Lightning right now. So this one looks like it would do better. It does way less damage than the other one. The other one I think was 706 or 16. But I still see the Hex Lightning taking over this one. Maybe if you have a lot of cooldown decrease, this would be able to bring it down more to where it's actually makes more sense. But if you are not getting killed quickly, then this one shouldn't matter. I would still go for the Hex Lightning. It's a low cooldown, and with the low cooldown and the high damage that it gives out, it's pretty good. I would even say this would be really good for bosses like PvE. So we're gonna stay on the Hex class. So we're gonna go down all the Hex energy. The first one they have is called the Hex Smash. Now, the Hex Smash focuses the Hex energy to lift up a huge object and smashes the target with it to deal 430% damage and knocks it down. It has a high guard break, and when the skill lands, they get knocked down. The cooldown is 13.5 seconds, so that's low. That's pretty low, and it requires only 22 stamina. Now, you compare it to the Hex Illusion, which the Hex Illusion injects Hex energy into an object created by illusion magic, then fires it forward to deal 728% damage and pushes the attacked enemy. It doesn't knock down, it knocks back when the skill lands, and it has a high guard break. No, let me correct myself. It has the highest guard break, because this bitch is throwing cars at your face. It should have the highest damage. It makes the most sense. But it has a longer cooldown and a higher amount of stamina. But because it has a high amount of guard break and it does a lot of damage, I still went the Hex Illusion over the Hex Smash. Now, the next skill under this one is HEX Strike. Now the HEX Strike focuses the HEX energy to lift up a huge object and swings it forward to deal 669% damage. When the skill lands, it knocks down the enemy as well, but it comes with a medium guard break, a cooldown of 18 seconds, required stamina of 30. This is the same thing as the Hex Illusion, but the Hex Illusion does more damage. So it's right there. It's the same. I mean, yeah, the Hex Illusion does more, like 728. The Hex Strike does 669. Because the Hex Illusion has the highest guard break and does more damage, I choose it over the Hex Strike. But the Hex Strike, you know, that's 1.5 seconds faster and the damage is not that far off. So honestly, you can choose either one of these two, and I would understand if people lean more towards the Hex Strike than Hex Illusion, because trust me, 1 second makes a huge difference. Now the last one here in this section is HEX Meteor. Now the HEX Meteor concentrates HEX energy to create a massive sphere that fires it at a target to deal 406% damage and knocks down the attacked enemy. This comes with a guard break that is also the highest. Cooldown is only 13.2 seconds and the required stamina is 24. So when it comes down to cooldown and required stamina, it beats the Hex Illusion. It also beats it when it comes to when it lands. The Hex Meteor knocks them down and the Hex Illusion only knocks them back. They both have the highest guard break. The only thing it lacks is in the damage output. This Hex Meteor only puts 406% when the Hex Illusion does 728%. Now, another difference here that you can see is that Hex Meteor has a wide range, a big range where it can attack, and the Hex Illusion is more the enemies need to be behind each other for it to attack all those enemies. So if you're going to attack a group of enemies, doing the Hex Meteor would probably do the most than the Hex Illusion, and the Hex Illusion is more of towards a single target. Unless there's multiple targets behind each other, then the Hex Illusion would work. But the Hex Meteor has more a range, as you can see, because when it starts off, you see how there's 3 guys in the Hex Meteor. On the right side, you see 3 guys next to each other, but on the left side in the Hex Illusion, you see 3 guys, but in the Hex Illusion, you see 3 guys, but they're behind each other, meaning that the range is smaller. Now, another thing you want to look at is in the Hex Illusion, when she throws those cards at you, as you can see, only the guy in the front dies. The other guys get hurt, but they don't fully die, meaning that the guy in the front gets the most damage and the other guys get less damage dealt to them. The one on the right, none of them die, but they all get the same amount of damage. That's just another thing you want to take note of. Now, continuing down the Hex Energy class, we are in this section over here. Now for this one, Hex Release to be the one that I chose out of all these. Even though it's not equipped, I just chose this one because I looked at all these and this one would probably be the one that I would go with, because on the left, if you guys can start comparing them, now the Hex Explosion detonates the focus Hex energy on the enemies to deal 342% damage and knocks them down. Now this also applies Subdue to the target with guard gauge below 50 for 1.5 seconds. So if their guard gauge is below 50%, they get subdued for 1.5 seconds. Now, the reason why I didn't choose the Hex Explosion and I still chose the Hex Break over the Hex Explosion is because the Hex Break has a low cooldown. It doesn't require that much stamina. Even though it has the lowest guard break, it only does a little bit less damage. For me, I think it's very important to always make sure that instead of using all skills with high amount of cooldown, you throw in a skill that has low cooldown, and it happens so fast. Look at when she uses it, look at how fast the skill goes. She just does that, bam, it's done, it's over. You can go on to your next move. Now let's compare it to the Hex Pinpoint. So the Hex Pinpoint focuses the Hex energy into a single point to deal 525% damage to the enemies nearby and pulls them in, like the ball absorbs them and then it explodes, causing damage. Now they get knocked down as well when it explodes, and when it lands, they get dragged towards the explosion. It also has a better guard break sitting at medium, but it has a higher cooldown and it has a higher stamina requirement. This one right here, I would say you can go either one. You can choose the hex break or the hex pinpoint, because I do see the hex pinpoint being more of a popular one depending on the situation that you're in. If you're going up against hordes of enemies, maybe the hex pinpoint. If you're going up against like Omega War or dimensional duels, the hex break would probably make more sense. But I still chose hex break over the hex pinpoint, but it can go either way on this one. Now, the last one in this category is the hex gravity. Now, hex gravity focuses the hex energy to press down the space around the enemies, dealing 280% damage and knocks them down when the skill lands. It has a higher cooldown sitting at 14.8 seconds, and the required stamina is 19, only just a few more than the required stamina of the hex break. So comparing these two, I still pick the hex break because of the low cooldown, the low required stamina, and it does more damage. If you want to incorporate moves that just keeps knocking them down, you can go with the hex gravity. But the top two that I saw in this category were the hex break as my go-to and the hex pinpoint. One of these two, depending where you are trying to use it in. Keep that in mind. Now, as you can see right here, we have the chaos judgment on the left and the dimensional energy on the right. Both are chaos magic. Now, at a glance, the dimensional energy looks like it's more of the one that people would look for and would want, but I chose chaos judgment. Now let me explain why. I chose chaos judgment even though it has less damage output. I still chose it on the fact that it takes only 8.5 seconds on the cooldown and only requires 11 required stamina. When it comes to the status effects that it does the same thing as the dimensional energy. So when this lands, it applies damage to relative 13% of attack per second. Now this stays hurting them for 5 seconds when the skill lands. Okay, when it lands, because sometimes when you hit them, it won't land, so it won't do the damage for 5 seconds if it doesn't land. But when it does land, they will get damage equal to 13% of the attack that you have. So the more attack that you have, the harder you're gonna hit. But don't drop everything and only focus on increasing your attack. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that the more attack you have, the more stronger, the more damage you're going to inflict on your enemy for those 5 seconds. Based on that, I went with the chaos judgment because dimensional energy needed to have more damage done in order for me to choose that one over chaos judgment. I'm looking at PvP and I'm trying to see like, okay, in a situation, I want to make sure that I have a low cooldown, and even though it does 208% damage in the place that I'm in, the level that I'm in right now, it is more valuable to me to get that skill out there and use the skill faster. It's only like a little over 100 less damage. It's okay because the status effect is what I'm looking at, because I want to be able to use this skill more often, because every time it lands, the most important thing here is that it increases the stamina consumption by 30% when using a skill. Every time they use a skill, it's going to require more of their stamina for the enemy. So it's more not about the damage, it's more about trying to get that statics effect to apply to you. And if I can do that pretty quick, then that's even better. So that's why I chose chaos judgment over dimensional energy. If dimensional energy applied more damage, then I can see like, okay, I can take that hit when it comes to waiting a little bit longer and using more of my stamina. The reward is much better. Now the next one we have is the chaos storm. Now the chaos storm drops a number of chaos magic's energies around her to deal 365% damage to the enemies and turn them unstable. The same thing applies to this one. It's more about me being able to use this skill faster than it is about how much damage it does. It's only, you know, it's not that much higher in damage. If this was 208 and this one was doing like 500 or above damage, then I'll be like, okay, then the chaos storm will probably be something I want to look into. The cooldown is only 13.9. It does have a higher amount of stamina, but the damage and the when it lands, it does, I like these bonus stats. If I'm able to use this and still get the same when the skill lands, and I'm causing them to increase their stamina, and I'm able to use this skill quickly, that's what I'm talking about right there. I'm going for the chaos judgment. And this one is the chaos magic, chaos sphere. When you look at the bonus stats that it applies, it's the same thing. The chaos sphere focuses chaos magic and launches the condensed energy to deal 792% damage to the enemies and turn them unstable. Now, hold up now. Now we're talking here, okay? The reason I still didn't choose Chaos Fear is because Chaos Fear is towards a single target. So Chaos Fear would be something that I see valuable in Dimensional Duel and PvE when you're going up against a boss. That's when this becomes valuable, and that is where I would choose Chaos Fear over the Chaos Storm. But since I am building her for level 90 PvP Omega War, because mark my words, level 90 PvP Omega War will be the meta. And because I am focusing on Omega War PvP, and only because of that, I choose the Chaos Storm over the Chaos Fear. But some can say that the Chaos Storm outbeats the Chaos Fear because even in Dimensional Duel, if you can keep hitting them and make them use more stamina, they're gonna have to have a high amount of stamina recovery rate to counter this. That's 30% when the skill lands. Now moving on over on this side, where you guys see this guy looking like he's throwing gang signs. On the left is the one that I went with, the Runic Observation, and on the right is the Humanity Collapsing. Now the Humanity Collapsing focuses the rune magic energy and launches it forward to deal 273% damage and makes the target unstable. When it comes to status effects, they both have the same status effect, decreasing attack by 25% for 6 seconds when cursed targets use attack skills. So every time they use an attack skill, their attack gets decreased by 25% for 6 seconds. It also deals damage equal to 15.2% of attack when cursed targets use. Now that is a little confusing because it says of attack when cursed targets use, like if there was supposed to be something else under there, but they didn't add it, you know, like use what? Like use what? What the hell are you talking about, man? Damn. Now it has a short cooldown and a short requires stamina. Now the reason why I went over the Runic Observation, now the Runic Observation, it creates giant runic alphabets behind her back to deal 342% damage to the enemies nearby and absorbs their life to turn them unstable. It does have a higher cooldown, a higher stamina. The reason why I chose this one is because it gets a whole group. As you can see, the range. And this one, you get it quicker. It doesn't use that much stamina, but it is more for like a single target, or if there's multiple targets but behind each other, and it does less damage. You can go either way here. If you are looking for like Dimensional Duel, then you probably might going to go for the Humanity Collapsing over the Runic Observation. The Runic Observation is mainly for groups, or if you're like an Omega War and there's like a group of enemies, they're fighting somebody, you just want to be able to make sure that you use a skill that has a good range, then the Runic Observation will be your best friend. Now the next one is Gift of Silence. Now the Gift of Silence summons a giant hand that draws a spell disc with chaos strings, creates ruins to deal 333% damage and pulls enemies in, inflicts silence and curse on hit enemies when the skill lands. So when the skill lands, it silences for 2 seconds, inflicts curse of constraint for 5 seconds when the skill lands as well, and it decreases attack by 25% or 6 seconds when cursed targets use attack skills. So as you can see, this one has a little bit different than the other one, the Runic Observation. The only thing missing from the Gift of Silence is deals damage equal to 15.2% of attack when cursed targets use. So as you can see, when it comes to damage, it does less than the Ruins Observation. The cooldown is longer. The required stamina is a little bit lower, but not enough to make a huge difference. So in my opinion, a no-go for me, but I do see a lot of people using that in Omega War. That might be something, but then again, people might just use it because it looks cool. But as of now, I still go over the Runic Observation over the Gift of Silence. Now the last one is the Runic Wither. Now the Runic Wither creates runic alphabets around her and then releases energy to send the runic alphabets flying towards the enemy to deal 413% damage. It also silences the enemies and turns them unstable. Now this one, as you can see, the targets have to be all over you. So you would have to use this in, let's just say, when you're playing manually and get in between a group of people and then use it, because if you're in auto, the CPU is not going to be like, oh, let me use it the right way. No, it's just going to use it and you're not even going to be in the middle of the circle. So it's probably going to get a couple people, but it's not going to really make that much of a difference when it comes to, you know, but it really, it's not going to do that much damage. Now the cooldown is 25, the required stamina is 28, and the damage is just not to the point where it's like, okay, there's a huge difference there, you know, it's not. And for that reason, I stick with the Runic Observation over the Runic Wither, letting you guys know right now, these are just my opinions. Now that was it for the chaos magic. Now we're gonna go on to my bread and butter, the witchcraft class. Now the witchcraft class, here we have two. We have the one on the right, which is the Witch's Pursuit, and the one on the left, which is the Witch's Descent. Now, as you guys can see, I use Witch's Descent. I chose this over the Witch's Pursuit because the Witch's Pursuit fires 2 energy orbs that chase the enemy to deal 265% damage each. If both orbs land on the same target, it deals max double guard damage. Now when it comes down to guard damage, now as you guys can clearly see, the cooldown and the required stamina are amazing. The guard break is the lowest, but for the Witch's Descent, the guard break is still low. When it comes to damage, it does only 269% compared to the Witch's Descent, which is 345%, but there's still not that big enough of a difference where you're gonna be like, wow, there's a huge difference here. No, there's not. So the reason why I chose this is because this move right here in the Witch's Descent, as you can see, she teleports through the enemy and comes back, leaving these 4 balls and that go and attack you. Well, more than 4 balls. So one moment you're in front of the enemy, next thing you know, you disappear, and now they have these balls coming right in their face. This move right here saves me so many times from getting out a sticky situation. And for that, I choose the Witch's Descent over the Witch's Pursuit. But if you guys don't find yourselves trying to get out of sticky situations, then use the Witch's Pursuit. But for me, for an example, sometimes I'm heading towards LeFay, right? And LeFay's about to do a move. I can use this move and just quickly teleport behind him. Or I know you can use your dashes, but let's just say you're out of dashes. This is technically another dash because you can't get targeted while using the Witch's Descent. That's another big one right there. The Witch's Descent is untargetable. Now the next one we have here is called the Witch's Sphere. Now the Witch's Sphere launches several energy fields to deal 793% damage. Now this one right here looks really good, and you would think that I would choose the Witch's Sphere over the Witch's Descent, but yeah, I still choose the Witch's Descent over this because the Witch's Sphere, honestly, this is a single target move, and even though it does do a good amount more damage than the Witch's Descent, the Witch's Descent teleports me away from harm and it makes me untargetable, and the cooldown is not that far off from the 12.8%. So I rather have something that can teleport me and keep me from getting hurt than being able to do a lot of damage. If you guys didn't notice, the Witch's Sphere does more damage, but it doesn't apply no status effects. There's nothing here. But on the Witch's Descent, it has decreased defense by 25% for 4.5 seconds when the skill lands. You got shit for Witch's Sphere. You got shit for Witch's Sphere. It doesn't have nothing. You're just getting that bonus damage and a faster cooldown rate and lower stamina. So this one right here, I can see it being good for dimensional duel, maybe like when you're going up against in PvE, when you're going up against villains, then the Witch's Sphere would make more sense. But for PvP and like Omega War purposes, I feel like the Witch's Descent would be better over the Witch's Sphere. Now the next one we have is the Witch's Force Field. Now the Witch's Force Field creates an energy sphere revolving around her body, dealing 955% damage, and it hits the enemy nearby constantly. So this is like somebody that's like Captain America or Magik, that's just going up and meleeing you and just doing damage straight to your face. You use this and it decreases their melee damage by 15% for 10 seconds. Now Iron Man Spin Blade, if that is technically a melee hit or a melee move, this will also make the Spin Blade hurt less. If you're like in Dimensional Duel and you know that you're fighting Iron Man and you know that that's the first move they're gonna do, you can just pop this up, and then when they hit you with that Spin Blade, is just it'll do 15% less damage for 10 seconds. Now 10 seconds is a pretty long amount of time, but here's where it starts hurting, because it has a good amount of damage if they're close to you, though. That's only if they're close to you. Now the cooldown is just 30% and the required stamina is almost 30% too. It's just the cooldown is too high, the required stamina is too much, and this is really, you have to be really close to the target for it to really affect your enemy. So that is why I didn't use the Witch's force field, and I chose the Witch's descent over this one. Now moving on to this guy over here. On my right, I have the reality fold, and on the left, we have the death chain. Now, the reality fold manipulates the surrounding space to create a force field, absorbing the damage dealt to herself and nearby allies. And when the skill, this also decreases damage received by 15% for 5 seconds. So every time you use this, it decreases the damage received for 15% for 5 seconds. And it has a low guard break. It has a low cooldown of 15.1 compared to the death chain, and it has a little bit higher stamina requirement at only 18 when the death chain is sitting at 16. Now when you use this does not apply any damage to the enemy when you use it. All this does is you use it and you just have a force field. You just take 15% less damage for only 5 seconds. Now 5 seconds, it's a pretty good amount of time, but I still chose the death chain over it because the death chain teleports behind the enemy and releases energy to deal 182% damage and causes confusion, and also the energy released transfers successfully to nearby enemies to spread damage. So this kind of just does damage and it spreads all over that group. It causes confusion. You see them starting to attack themselves. I use this in Omega War or in PvE and when I'm fighting hordes, and it's cool to see these people just all get hit and then they all start fighting each other for a short amount of time. And it's funny, and I love this one. Now it does have a higher cooldown, but the required stamina is less and it causes damage when I use it. But for the fact that it causes confusion, it attacks a huge group of people and it spreads, I use this over the death chain. You can argue that the reality fold would probably make more sense in a PvP because it would keep you alive longer. If you are getting killed fast, then you might want to look into the reality fold. But if you're not getting killed real fast, then that is not something you want to look into. You want to go with the death chain. Now the next one we have here is called the teleportation wave. Now this teleports you to the enemy and releases an energy wave to deal 553% damage. The cooldown is sitting at a good 10.8%. and the required stamina is only 20%, only 4 more points higher than the required stamina in the death chain. Now when you use this, it does deal more damage than the death chain, a lot more damage, 553 compared to 182%. Oh yeah, that's a good difference right there. And the cooldown is way less. So when I'm looking at it this way, it makes more sense to go for the teleportation wave than it does for the death chain. The death chain would be more of a PvE when you're fighting hordes than PvP. If you're PvP, teleportation wave would make more sense, and I would go with teleportation wave. So teleportation is the one that I choose over death chain. Now the next one that we have here is called the reality warp. Now what this does, it manipulates the time and space around herself to become invincible and recovers the ultimate skill gauge. Also, you cannot use a skill when you are invincible. Just keep that in mind. So when you use this skill, you recover your ultimate gauge. Your ultimate skill gauge gets a boost every time you use this skill. So if you want to get your ultimate faster, you want to equip this one because it will speed up the time it takes you to get your ultimate skill. But look at that cooldown, 35.2 seconds, and the required stamina is 31. I don't know about that. You know, even though it manipulates the time and space around, and you know, you become invincible and recovers ultimate skill at the same time. I don't know, man. That cooldown is way too long compared to the teleportation wave that does 555%, and the reality warp does no damage, and you cannot use the skill when you're invincible. So the teleportation wave, not only does it have a huge difference when it comes down to cooldown, sitting at 10.8 seconds compared to the cooldown for the reality warp sitting at 35.2 seconds. Also, it has a huge difference in required stamina consumption, sitting at 20 compared to the required stamina from the reality warp, which sits at 31%. So the reality warp is all about recovering your ultimate gauge and trying to get your ultimate faster. But man, that cooldown really makes a difference. So that's why I just didn't even bother using the reality warp, and I used the teleportation wave. And I am going to be using the teleportation for now on in the PvP. PvE, I'm just gonna use the death chain, but for PvP, I'm gonna use the teleportation wave. Now moving on over here, to the very last, all the way at the bottom right, you can go to the last one, the Shape of Terror section. Now on the left, we have the Terror Incarnate, and on the right, we have the Terror Assault. Now the Terror Assault teleports to the enemy and releases a shockwave of energy, dealing 469% damage and slowing effect enemies. Now this also decreases movement speed by 40% for 5 seconds when the skill lands. Now it has a low guard break where the Terror Incarcerate doesn't have no guard break at all. The cooldown is more than half than the cooldown in the Terror Incarnate, and the required stamina is 19, which is only 1 more than the required stamina of the Terror Incarnate. This also does damage when you just summon it, compared to the Terror Incarnate, which does damage based on a percentage of what attack you have. So you have to have a high amount of attack for your double to be able to do a high amount of damage. But in situations where you just want to get close to the enemy and then you want to be able to use that skill and not have to wait pretty quickly and not have to wait 35 seconds to reuse it again, then the Terror Skull would be the one you want to go for. For me, I love the fact that I can summon another version of me and at the same time have my companion, the Hulk, show up. And you know how OP the Hulk is, and now there's 3 on 1. So, and just for that, I love it. And because when you summon your double, it's your double gets summoned for 10 seconds and it assists you in combat for that duration. So it's like a companion. You're summoning 2 companions at the same time if you calculate everything correctly and you're not playing on auto and you're playing on manual, and you use the companion and the Terror Incarnate at the same time. So that's if you have the Incredible Hulk companion. So now you have the Incredible Hulk and your double fighting, and it's you 3 against the other guy. And you know, that's come on, that just that makes for a cool party. So I choose the Terror Incarnate over this one, even though the Terror Incarnate has a higher amount of cooldown. Now the next one we have here is called the Shadowy Terror. Now the Shadowy Terror releases a shock wave of energy, dealing 349% to nearby enemies and disappears into the shadows. This has a lower cooldown of 26.1% compared to the 35.7 in Terror Incarnate, and the required stamina is sitting at a pretty 23 compared to this required stamina at 18. So it does have a higher required stamina, but it makes up for it for the lower cooldown. Also, when you use this skill, it applies 349% damage instantly compared to the no damage being used. The damage used is the one that's based off your attack, because your double in the Terror Incarcerate can only apply 24.76% of your total attack. So the higher your attack is, the better and more damage your double is going to do for the Terror Incarnate. But the Shadowy Terror over here, you vanish for 3 seconds, but only 1 second out of that 3 you're unhittable or you're invincible. So the Shadowy Terror will be perfect for dimensional duels, or if you're in a situation where you are not playing in auto and you're strategizing your attacks and you know that the enemy is about to use a skill that you know that is going to kill you, you can use this skill and it will save you. It will save you, because you're gonna disappear for 3 seconds, but 1 second, trust me, in dimensional duel, that 1 second will mean the world and will save you at times. So the Shadowy Terror will be the one I would go for like PvP purposes. But Terror Incarnate, I just love that. I just love that skill. Now the last one we got here is the Terror Consumption. Now the Terror Consumption creates an illusion of herself near the target. The illusion also deals 276% damage upon being summoned, and periodically infuses Scarlet Witches with energy to increase her attack. This effect is applied upon region max stack count, untargetable, and you are also untargetable while using this skill. So when it says right here, it increases the attack, and the effect only applies once you reach the max stack count. So only when you reach the max stack, your attack increases by 30%. And now when you compare this to the Terror Incarnate, it has a lower cooldown, a higher stamina requirement. So this one, like I said on the other one, is a lifesaver because while you're using this skill, you are untargetable. That right there will save you a lot. If you're playing manual and you are strategizing your skills, just like I said in the other skill, this will save you a lot. And honestly, the terror consumption and the shadowy terror are both top ones for this category. And then on third place, I'll probably put the terror incarnate just because I love this skill. It's my favorite skill that Scarlet Witch has. All right, guys, if you still are around and you guys haven't left and you guys are still one of my faithful viewers, then thank you guys so much for staying to the end of the video. I wanted to give you guys a little bonus. Now the bonus is here is in the Darkhold. Now the Darkhold, when you use it, it does 1,209% from the level that I'm at right now. It's only at level 10. I think it's 15 levels, so it's gonna get more powerful. But when you use the ultimate, there's some enhances that take effect. So it enhances all of the classes. So the enhancement that the HEX Energy class, so this is for the people that are thinking about making a HEX Energy build. Now all the skills that use HEX Energy, it's going to get increase in damage by 20% for 15 seconds. That means that when you use your ultimate, you want to make sure you're using all your HEX skills that you have, because for that 15 seconds, the damage that those HEX Energy skills do is increased by 20%. Witchcraft also gets enhanced. So all the skills that you have that are Witchcraft, they cool down way faster by a whopping 15% faster for 15 seconds. That means that if you're using Witchcraft skills, you're going to be able to use them 15% faster for 15 seconds. So that right there is a huge one for me because I am using a mixture of Witchcraft and Chaos. Now the other, last but not least, is the Chaos Magic. Now the Chaos Magic gets enhanced because the status effect duration applied to the target is increased by 75% for 50 seconds. So the enhancement for the Chaos Magic is that it increases the status effect duration on the target by 75% for 15 seconds, and they cannot guard. So that right there is really, really good because since I'm using a mixture of Witchcraft and Chaos, then I'm going to increase my status effect duration by 75%, and my skills that are Witchcraft cool down 15% faster for 15 seconds. Now, if you are using Hex, you are going to be doing 20% more damage for each of your Hex skills. So every time you use a Hex Energy skill, it does 20% more damage. But now you guys know, this right here will guide you to where you guys want to build your character in. Well, Scarlet Witch has multiple different builds. She is the first hero that they came out with, and we can actually see that there's no real meta for her. She has multiple builds. She can be built for PvE. She can be built for PvP. If you want to focus on critical damage, there's a gear set that focuses on critical damage over defense pierce. And if you want to have defense pierce, then there's that Dark Domain set. Then you have the car set. But Xander also works really well for PvE. And there's a good amount of people that are rocking the Xander. So it's Xander. There's just multiple different gear sets that will work. Honestly, Scarlet Witch is a well-balanced hero. In my opinion, they did a great job with Scarlet Witch. I'm having a really good time coming out with this content. So if you guys stuck around to the end of the video to get this little extra bonus, make sure you guys comment down below bananas. Well, I know that you guys are one of the loyal viewers. And as always, catch you guys next time.